Hey guys, welcome to this video. It is Friday the 3rd of April. Shabbat Shalom. We're coming up to Shabbat Hagadol. This is the great Sabbath, right before the Passover. And this is when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. This is when the Exodus happened and they took the lamb into the home before the Passover, 4 days before the Passover. And this is when Joshua led the Israelites over the Jordan after the 40 years in the wilderness. I wanted to share this with you. Zechariah 12:10. Could this be a description of quarantine? It says, "And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one is in bitterness for his firstborn." So that would be the death of the firstborn. And it says here, "I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications." So this cannot be at the end of the tribulation when it says, "They shall look upon me whom they have pierced." This is obviously when the inhabitants of Jerusalem are still settled, because it says, "I'll pour the spirit of grace and of supplication." That's not going to happen at the end of the tribulation. So they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. This is the realization that Jesus Christ is the Messiah at the rapture of the church. So they are going to look upon Yeshua whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him. And it says, "And in that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem." So we know that Israel going to the wilderness, and they are at Petra, and that's when obviously Jesus comes and returns. So this is not talking about that period of time. It's talking about a great mourning in Jerusalem as in bitterness for the death of the firstborn. I think this is at the rapture of the church. And it says in Zechariah 12:12, "And the land shall mourn, every family apart." Now, if you have been watching what's going on in Israel, they are now separating all the ultra-Orthodox Jews, and all the people who are in Israel are on lockdown. The families are forced to stay in their homes. It says in Zechariah 12:12, "And the land shall mourn, every family apart, the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Levi apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Shimei apart, and their wives apart, all the families that remain, every family apart, and their wives apart." So where it's saying that the families are apart and the wives are apart, it means that the wives are apart from each other, so that the wives are not collected together, because obviously the Jewish family culture, all the wives huddle together, and all the husbands and the men huddle together. But this says that every family is apart, and their wives are apart, which means that the families themselves are isolated and apart from one another, and the wives are not together. Why? Because the families are apart. So this sounds like quarantine, that this is going to happen. And if that is the case, then while we are in quarantine, that's when they are going to realize that Yeshua is Messiah, because that's when the rapture of the church will happen, and then the blindness will be removed from the eyes of Israel. Romans 11:25, "I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye shall be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part," not full blindness, but partial blindness, they believe the Father but not the Son, "blindness in part has happened to Israel until the blindness has happened to Israel until the coming in of the Gentiles, until the Gentiles become in." So Romans 11:25 tells us that that's when Israel's blindness is going to be removed. The rapture of the church is going to remove Israel's blindness. It's going to remove the whole world's blindness in terms of who the king is and what the truth is. And then, of course, they're going to have to contend with the Antichrist. But Zechariah chapter 12 sounds like quarantine. It sounds like they're in quarantine when they realize who Yeshua is. And that's when the spirit of grace and supplication is poured out upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So this cannot be at the end of the tribulation, because they're in Jerusalem, and it's a spirit of grace and of supplication. "And they shall look upon Yeshua who they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him." Right? So I wanted to share that with you. It sounds like Zechariah chapter 12 is when people are in quarantine. So I'm going to go live soon, and we'll share some studying together, and I will see you then.